going on? I'm Arch Manning, Viore athlete and college quarterback. Whether I'm running, training, traveling, or just unwinding at home, I love doing it in my core shorts from Viore. With a breathable boxer brief liner, they're quick to dry, super versatile, and stand up to even my most intense training sessions. Plus, they come in 3 inseams and a ton of colors. Ready to try a pair? Go to viore.com/arch and get 20% off at checkout. I think you're going to love them as much as I do. That's VUORI.com/ARCH and get 20% off your first order. Exclusions apply. Visit the website for full terms and conditions. Not only will you receive 20% off your first purchase, but enjoy free shipping on any U.S. orders over $75 and free returns. Have a great day.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey everybody, welcome to 100 Songs That Define Heavy Metal, the podcast. I am Brian Slagel, I am your host, I am the CEO of Metal Blade Records. In our almost 43 years of existence, which is scary to say, we've been home to bands like Metallica, Slayer, Amon Amarth, Killswitch Engage, Black Dahlia Murder, Whitechapel, and the band we're talking about today, Cannibal Corpse. Today we're talking about the great death metal song and probably the death metal anthem, the great song by Cannibal Corpse, Hammer Smashed Face. And we're going to have our good friend Jay Ruston, who's actually a really big Cannibal Corpse fan, talk about that on the production end. And then we'll have a member from Cannibal Corpse, the amazing Mr. Paul Mazurkiewicz, the drummer from Cannibal, who was, of course, played on the song and co-wrote the song as well. So it'll be fun to talk to all those guys. But first, as always, we welcome in our good friend Martin Popoff, who's written 150 books on heavy metal, and he's going to give us some background and some history on the song by Cannibal Corpse.
Absolutely, Brian. Hammer Smashed Face, Cannibal Corpse, super important song in heavy metal history because it's the most important song in death metal history. A very conservative, iconic American death metal sound is kind of what is established by Cannibal Corpse. They've got 16 albums by this point. We've got the great Chris Barnes on vocals. This is up into their 3rd album, Tomb of the Mutilated, 1992. He's there for one more album, The Bleeding, and then he's on to a similarly prolific and illustrious death metal career with 6 Feet Under, and Cannibal Corpse gets in George Corpse Grinder Fisher. But yeah, this is a super important song. It's essentially this band's Ace of Spades. It is the first song on this album. This album is notorious for the lyrics and the sleeve art being banned and all that stuff. But it's also notorious, or it's famous, this song, because Jim Carrey, Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, he wanted the song in the movie, and it absolutely is in the movie. There's this story of how much he was excited to meet the band, as the band quips, more excited than they were even to meet him. Like, so he was like a big fan. So it gets into that, and and the other thing that makes this song so famous over the years is the fact that, it was pushed forward. There's an EP version that has a Possessed cover of The Exorcist on it and a Black Sabbath cover of Zero the Hero, which is very highly regarded. And then there's a single version, and both of those have picture sleeve art. I don't think they were crazy about the art on the sleeves of these items, but yeah, they were ancillary products that go with this. Yeah, incredible band, an absolutely persevering Metal Blade institution, as is 6 Feet Under. Cannibal Corpse, of course, formed in 88, but now they're based out of Tampa. And like I say, up into this 3rd album, Tomb of the Mutilated, they are recording at Morris Sound. So with this song, they're getting an iconic death metal sound and absolutely, squarely down the middle, kind of the invention of the perfect death metal vocal out of Chris Barnes. And you also get thoughtful, complicated, almost like jazz fusion or prog type atonal riffing. You get stops and starts, different speeds, triggering. You get almost like D-beat sort of drumming. This album is also quite highly regarded for it's recorded. So yeah, death metal is really moving along, even at this early stages. I mean, there are growing by fits and leaps, and it is very complicated mathematical music. And in fact, even in today's heavy metal environment, I think one of the biggest influences that you get on today's big, exciting, complicated, creative metal is from death metal, and that all comes from Cannibal Corpse. And like I say, this is an absolutely conservative or iconic American death metal sound, as opposed to what you would get out of Swedish death metals, kind of more death and roll, a little more groove to it kind of thing. But this is just very, very high concept sort of music. And, it's funny, 6 Feet Under and Cannibal Corpse now both have very lush production values, but they're still plying the same sort of trade. But yeah, it's very cool to see both of them still going. And I got to add that Cannibal Corpse, throughout the years, you've had Alex and Paul in there all the way throughout. They've only had the two vocalists. This is a band with a long history, and even the rest of the lineup has been pretty stable these days. You've got Eric Rutan on guitar, also producing, and like I say, making a really good job of it. But there you go, Hammer Smashed Face. This band's Ace of Spades from Tomb of the Mutilated, released September 22nd, 1992, produced by Scott Burns at Morrisound.
Thank you, Martin. Always some interesting information there. So
this episode is brought to you by Credit Karma. When it comes to your money, Credit Karma keeps you ahead of the game. You can count on Credit Karma to keep up with your financial needs as they evolve, helping you monitor your progress and giving you personalized recommendations so you can make strides towards your goals. Make sure you're on the right track, no matter where you are on your financial journey. Intuit Credit Karma. Karma you can count on. Download today.
So now I'm going to bring in our good friend, Mr. Jay Ruston, to talk some more about Cannibal Corpse's great Hammer Smashed Face song. How are you, Jay?
I'm excellent. How are you, Brian?
I'm good. We're going into the full ray of the heaviness now.
Yes.
It's time we bring in some real heaviness. So this song was recorded, obviously, by the great legendary Scott Burns, who just put out a book, by the way, which I have not read, but if you are so inclined, people should go out and check it out. I heard it's very good. At, of course, the also legendary Morris Sound Studios in Tampa, Florida. So what are your initial thoughts on this one?
I've heard this song thousands of times, obviously. It's like their song, and it's the guitar sound. They nailed it. It's perfect. To me, it's like a cross between Ride the Lightning and their own thing. It's just absolutely perfect. As soon as the song starts, you're like, oh yeah, fucking A, this is incredible. Then, of course, Alex's bass tone, his playing, the drums. When you make a record like this in 1992, and I started making records in about 93, 94, the technology that was available besides fantastic analog tape to fix and repair stuff was limited at best, as you know. And the problem is now everything can be fixed. So back then, you had to play amazing, and you could cut tape and everything, of course, but the fact that it's as tight as it is, especially all the double bass and everything, just blows me away.
Yeah, and they were really young too. I mean, this is just their third record basically, and they're still in their early 20s. This was the record for me that I love the first two records, obviously, but this was the one where I kind of was like, ooh, this is a next level now. The playing, the songwriting, the way it sounded, it just seemed next level to me. And that's the first time I thought, this band might have something really special here.
Yeah, no kidding. And yeah, like you said, for their age, that's absolutely incredible, because most musicians at that age are still learning the craft, maybe learning how to write, not necessarily being that amazing at their instruments. Of course, you can look at bands like Rush, At the Gates, a lot of bands that were young but that made incredibly technical records. Pretty mind-blowing.
It's very impressive, and I'm excited to get to talk to Paul Mazurkiewicz, the drummer, after we talk our thing here. So it'll be interesting to get his perspective on where they were at and how they wrote the song and everything. But it's become obviously their signature song, and maybe even the signature song from death metal in large part. And we'll talk about it more with Paul because of Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, because that the song and the band are in there, which is still kind of a crazy thing. When did you first realize that Cannibal Corpse was in that movie?
The first time I saw it, I was like, there's a metal band in this movie, and pre-internet. But then I found it in like a metal magazine, and there was like a photo of, I think, of them on set or something. I forget what magazine. I was just blown away. And the first thing me and my buddies did in Windsor, Detroit area was go buy the record and be astonished at the artwork and terrified of the lyrics, blown away. But for me, it was the guitar tone. And I'm a bass player, so I, of course, loved Alex's playing and I loved his tone. I thought it was really interesting and unique that he didn't go for like an overly distorted bass sound. He let the guitars handle that, and he's got a pretty clean tone if you think about it, and it just works so well because it's got its own special place in the mix, kind of like Getty.
Yeah, I mean, I know he was, big time influenced by Geddy Lee and Steve Harris and those kind of guys. So it wouldn't probably surprise me that the bass tones would be a little cleaner. Have you ever been to Morris Sound, by the way?
No, actually, obviously very familiar with it, and I know that studio in Tampa was like the hub. So it's not a place I've been yet, but I would love to check it out.
It was a really great studio. We did a couple 6 Feet Under records down there, and it was a lot of fun to be there. But what was really surprising to me, and I was there before, doing a record there. I don't know, one of the Cannibal Corpse records. I'm sure I was down there to hear some of the studio stuff, but it's a really nice studio. Like, I mean, this is back even in the early 90s, we weren't used to, recording at like big time recording studios because the budgets still weren't huge. But this place was really nice, like huge boards, like these beautiful, Neves and the whole thing. And it was a really nice studio. And I guess the fact that it was in Tampa helped with the pricing, and the Morris brothers who owned it were just really amazing people, and they were just music fans. They loved music, and they gave us like crazy deals on be able to make records there. But I think that's why it sounds so good. I mean, again, Scott Burns, who was the producer, is a legend in the death metal world, of course.
Oh yeah, his credits are insane.
Yeah, and he clearly knew what he was doing. But I've always discovered, and you can, I'm sure, relate to this, is that it's pretty easy to get a good recording if the band themselves sound good.
It starts with the drummer. Paul's amazing. Then it just goes from there. Obviously, a lot of bands have a weak link, but when the band is that good and that committed to their craft, you basically, as a producer engineer, just don't fuck it up. Like, get out of the way. Great mics and a great mixing desk, obviously, but the band has to be great and the drummer has to be great, because I've always said bad drummer, bad band. And there's a lot of bands that replace their drummers. Rush, Nickelback, I mean, the list just goes on and on for that very specific reason. We need the best we can get, and Paul's a beast. So when you have a band that tight, your job as an engineer becomes so much easier, especially when the drummer hits correctly, when the bass player and the guitar players have their tone down and they know what they want and they're not questioning. And it's difficult when you walk in a studio and a band member isn't sure what their tone should be, because you don't want to put your own stamp on it. You want them to sound like them, which these days is even tougher because so much modern metal just all sounds exactly the same. It's interchangeable almost. So you want them to walk in with an attitude. This is what my guitar sound is. This is what my bass sound is. I want my snare drum to sound like this. Charlie Benante's snare drum sounds exactly the same on almost every record because he tunes it and he hits it that way. And this band is exactly the same, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. So death metal is extremely difficult, in my opinion, to produce, and more importantly to mix, because everything kind of is in the same spot. Like, you've got the low tones of the guitars, you've got the kick drums fighting on that, then the bass fighting on top of that, and now you're putting in vocals that are kind of in that same frequency and wavelength. So trying to get separation from all that so people can hear what's going on and really hear what's happening is really difficult to do.
Well, something that he did, which I thought was very smart on this record, the drums are fairly dry. and they're punchy and they're loud in the mix. Almost like the bass almost is a little quiet for me, but his tone is so good that you still hear it. It's like there. It's not like a Newstead mix, but it's there, you know? But the guitar sound, they weren't afraid of mid-range, and you have that bite to it, which I think is so important because that actually made a hole for the vocals. Because normally a vocal would sit where those guitars are if someone's singing, but because he's, you know, growling, his frequency range has been brought down, and now you have this like space where the guitar and bass are not filling that is perfect for his vocals. Like it's like right here in the mix. You can almost like reach in and like grab the vocal. It's amazing.
Yeah, and that, like I said, that's so hard to do. I'm going to talk about it with Paul. At this point, they're the biggest death metal band of all time, which is pretty insane. But a lot of people don't understand the vocals, like why the vocals there. And a lot of, old school guys don't like the vocals. They like some of the music, but they don't like the vocals because they're so guttural. What's your vibe on that?
As a teenager growing up and getting into metal, I was all about Dickinson and Maiden and, big, giant singing vocals. It wasn't until much later in life that I started to dig backwards and check out Cannibal Corpse, At the Gates, Amon Amarth, like all different genres really of the same thing, but appreciating that vocal sound, getting to produce that vocal sound, and having my whole world opened up. I started to get into all kinds of different Swedish and Norwegian death metal bands, and from the help of some of my clients too. So for me, it was more of an education later in life. Probably the most aggressive vocals I was into at the time was Pantera, which was sort of singing, but sort of yelling. And so, yeah, it was definitely for me, a growth thing to get into it and learn about it. And I'm picky and choosy about which ones I do like, but I do like it.
And I realize there might be some people listening to this podcast that might not have listened to previous podcasts. So I was very terrible in giving you your introduction today. So I wanted to mention that Jay has produced, amongst many, many other bands like Avatar and Amon Amarth, of course, Anthrax and Corey Taylor and all that other stuff. So you've got experience in making phenomenal death metal albums.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I think the reason some of those bands work with me is because I've genre bounced so much. I've made country records, pop music. I've made an opera record. I really like to be involved in all kinds of music because I love all kinds of music. I've done the most hard rock and metal, like that's the biggest chunk of my resume, of course. But certainly Avatar and Amon Amarth, in conversations with them, were like, well, you're not a typical metal or death metal producer, which is why we wanted to work with you. I thought that was interesting because we were both coming from slightly different worlds. Still, we all love Maiden and Metallica and Pantera, but then they would go deeper and then educate me on, especially the Swedish bands, the bands they grew up listening to that I might not necessarily have even known of.
Yeah, and again, I know Paul's influences were a lot of the classic metal stuff too. Maiden, Priest, Sabbath, like every one of these bands all came from that background. Even the younger bands still go back and tout Maiden and stuff as huge influence of them, even though it's like super heavy music. And somebody mentioned to me once, and again, I'm sure I'll bring it up with Paul again, is about the vocals, because some people get it and some people don't, and I totally understand that. Like a lot of us older folk don't go down the guttural vocals thing, but I do like it. And I remember somebody, and I wish I could remember who it was that told me this, but basically what was happening was the music was getting heavier and heavier and heavier, but the vocals couldn't get any heavier. So all of a sudden, really started with Death and Chuck Schuldiner with his vocal style when Scream Bloody Gore came out by Death. And all of a sudden there was something different. And that's kind of where a lot of these bands picked up on that. And that way the vocals could be just as heavy as the music was.
Yeah, it became like a fifth instrument, really. And it had to happen. There was no, as you said, there was no other progression. These voices can get higher. That doesn't sound heavy and cool. You can only put so much aggression. And again, there are singers that can do it. James Hetfield, Corey Taylor, they can put in this aggression without, grunting or growling that still sounds incredibly heavy. But, that's difficult to do as well, to sing and scream and go back and forth like that. It's very challenging. Yeah, it's that vocal style had to evolve into this.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, and we'll get to these bands sooner than later, but then you've got bands like Killswitch Engage, which are kind of both hardcore with the heavy vocals, but they also have really good clean vocals as well, and that's kind of an interesting revolution of how that stuff has happened. But Cannibal Corpse, of course, I mean, they weren't the original death metal band, but they kind of, in my opinion, kind of rewrote the playbook on death metal about what you can do and how extreme you can be, not only musically, but clearly lyrically and visually with the album covers and all that sort of stuff. And I think that they became super controversial, obviously, but in the same way, like they're looked at in pulp culture as like this, like basically the death metal band, and they're in Ace Ventura and all these things that normally things like that wouldn't happen. So it's really interesting, the trajectory of their career, and it really all started with this one song, and that still is their signature song to this day. And doing the research, I mean, some people might say that's the signature death metal song of all time.
Could be, yeah. I mean, seems to be the growing theory. And I think I was reading somewhere a while ago that they got other film offers as well for appearances, but ended up like some either it didn't work out because they were already in a movie, or that's been done, which is kind of too bad because it'd been great to get them even more exposure.
Yeah, you don't want to get overexposed either, right?
No, I suppose not. But for a death metal band, it's I don't think it's too bad to be in more than one movie.
True.
I love that Jim Carrey knew all the lyrics too. Like he was like nerding out on them, and
well, yeah, he personally requested them to be in the movie. That's how they ended up being in the movie, because he was a big fan of theirs, and I guess he knew that they lived in Tampa and they were filming the movie in Miami, so it wouldn't be that hard for them to get there. He requested them personally, which is amazing.
It's interesting too that you mentioned like what a great studio Morrisound was, and that it was generally, I assume, affordable for these types of bands, because there was a lot of studios in Florida at that time, big competition. You had Criteria, you had Quad, where Anthrax did Among the Living. It's not like it was studio less, so it's like, I guess maybe that healthy competition kept the price in check. I don't know.
Yeah, and Tampa back then was pretty inexpensive, and doing a studio there, I think they needed to just get in as many people as possible, and it didn't really, and they were really great with the costs. I remember early on, like I said, when they first made one of their records at Morrisound, I was like, okay, cool. I didn't really know much about the studio. I knew obviously some of the other stuff that they had done there, so I was familiar with it, but I didn't realize until I got there how nice a studio it was.
Yeah, for sure. Did you attend these actual sessions?
No, I didn't go for these. I think the first Cannibal record I went down there for was the one that followed this one. So,
well, on this record, especially if you're familiar with the first two albums, you can tell like their focus was musicianship and complicated playing. Like, we want to be a better band that plays more complicated music. I remember talking to Alex years ago. We had dinner, and him telling me, because I asked him about this record, of course, and him saying, yeah, our goal was to be better players and make a difficult record, like challenge ourselves, what they absolutely did.
Again, that I think really raised the bar for all of death metal when this record came out, and people saw again how extreme everything was and how good the playing was, and vocally, and just the whole thing was really like the perfect package, and kind of took it to another level, which is why we're talking about it as being one of the 100 songs that define heavy metal.
And it's funny, this record and At the Gates, I often play for bands and say, look, these were done on tape. They played these songs with or without click. It doesn't really matter. They're super tight, and it can be done. So stop relying on the computer. Stop saying, oh, well, you can fix that later. Sure, but then you automatically sound just like everybody else the second you edit the crap out of it and make it perfect. So why not just perfect the performance, rehearse, play great like they did, and you're going to make a great record.
Yeah, it's 100% right. And that's really the problem that we have these days, is trying to find bands that are different and unique and sound that way, because it is so easy just to make a record that just sounds like everybody else. But that's certainly not what labels, and I don't think what fans want either.
No, absolutely. And there's a lot of metal records where the drums are clearly programmed these days, more than ever. And, that's fine. That works for those bands, but it's two different types of fan groups as well. Those bands are going to have a fan base that's probably more lyric focused, singer focused, They're not focused on the actual musicianship of the band. And then you have metal bands that are clearly playing, clearly practicing their craft. Their fan base is going to be different. It's going to be much more group focused. They're going to know every member's name. I mean, you know what it was like as a kid looking at the back of a vinyl record, memorizing all the names, who played what, who produced, who engineered, like I was obsessed with that stuff, and no doubt is what led me down the path of becoming a producer, was seeing Ted Templeman, Bo Hill, then later Brendan O'Brien, and it just, for me, it was like that was the moment.
100%. Well, again, thanks as always for doing this. Much appreciated. And we'll see you next time.
Sounds great, Brian. Thank you.
All right. We continue our discussion about the great heavy metal song by Cannibal Corpse, Hammer Smashed Face. And now we bring in a member of Cannibal Corpse who played on this song and partially wrote this song. He played drums, of course, Mr. Paul Mazurkiewicz. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Brian. How are you?
I'm good. A couple things I want to talk about. So this is the first like really heavy song we've done so far, and obviously I have to bring it in. And I figured this is a good place to start because it's pretty much the signature death metal song of all time, more or less, for a variety of reasons we will get into shortly. But before we get to there, I wanted to kind of find out about like what music were you listening to growing up that really influenced you? Because I think a lot of people that aren't big death metal fans just think you're listening to God knows what.
Well, I appreciate to be on this show, first of all. That's amazing that we can be included in the top 100 metal songs. So that's amazing. Being a product of the mid 80s, I suppose, growing up as a teenager and getting really heavily into music around, 80, 82, you got your bands, of course, like at that time, Iron Maiden and Black Sabbath and Judas Priest in the early 80s. And then, Metallica comes into play, and then Slayer. And then that's when we really started, or myself, and I probably think most of the guys in the band, started taking that interest in that heavier kind of music that's, all of a sudden here, like, what is this? I mean, it just grabbed us, the bands, the thrash bands like a Slayer and Creator and Dark Angel and Sacrifice and all that. So, I mean, those were probably the main influences for Cannibal Corpse, because we were born a few years after that in December of 1988. So all these thrash bands that were happening, starting like we just said, Slayer, 80, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, those years with all that thrash that was happening, that was so influential for us and for me, of course, as a musician, as a drummer, and as a fan of music. Slayer would probably be the biggest one, and that was Dave Lombardo was the most influential, I think, on my drumming, for sure. I'll never forget hearing Rain and Blood for the first time. I mean, and we were already fans of Slayer with the Hell Awaits and the EP and all that. I'll never forget buying the cassette tape at the mall and putting it into my car, actually, and hearing it for that first time. And it was just like, it was obviously taking it to a whole nother level that we've seen with Slayer, right? And that just solidified my want, I suppose, of wanting to, to emulate that and be as close as I can. And I'm obviously not even close to being Lombardo's in his league, but
nobody is.
Exactly. So yes, the Slayer would have been one of the biggest influences for Cannibal Corpse and for myself, for sure.
Yeah, I find listening to your music, it reminded me a lot of Sabbath, Maiden, and Priest, the three bands you mentioned, and I felt musically I could really hear those influences in there, and that's what I really liked about it, because it wasn't just this over the top heavy music. It was like, wow, there's a lot of melody in here, and even in the vocals there are melody. And people ask me all the time, like, well, doesn't all this stuff sound the same? Like, what makes one band better than the other? It's the melodies, and people don't realize how many melodies there are in the death metal stuff.
It was a tough transition back in the 80s, I think, for people like yourself that's a little older and you're used to your hard rock and your heavy metal, And for me too, I remember hearing Metallica for the very first time. I mean, and that obviously they were, of course, a game changer, right? So I remember hearing Metal Militia, which is probably not the song that's going to be an easy transition from hearing Iron Maiden or Judas Priest to hearing Metal Militia, as opposed to something like Seek and Destroy, right? So hearing Metal Militia, it was over my head. I mean, I'm like, what is going on here? This is just crazy. This song is insane. And I kind of didn't really like it, It was too much. But then, as time goes on, you start listening, I don't know, just your taste change. And before you know it, of course you love it. So So it was that weird transitional time in the 80s, which I'm glad to be a part of, actually.
Yeah. So when you guys were writing and recording this song, I always like to ask this question. When you're in the studio creating it, and even, when you're writing it, like, did you feel this was something special, that this was going to be like a standout song, or is it just like, just another song?
Well, I think back then everything happened so quick with us. I mean, you look at the turnaround from album to album. We put what, 4 albums out in a matter of 4 years. That's insane in itself. So we were obviously just constantly writing and always trying to write the better song. And I believe we're still trying that to this day. I don't remember actually. I don't even think I remember anything being in the studio per se, but I do remember, of course, writing the song. And there's a little story behind that I know we've mentioned it before, and it's probably a lot about people probably don't know this. Just before we started writing for Tomb of the Mutilated, I guess that would have been in 92 at some point. I remember Alex and I actually had a little bit of a band squabble going on, basically in Buffalo, New York at this time. And I remember we were practicing in this facility where a lot of bands were. And I remember we got back, I believe we might have got back from our very first tour, the tour, for Butcher to Birth, because, how many tours did we did? We did one in the States, I believe one in Europe, and now it's time to move on to writing. And we had a little problem, a little band rift, I suppose. And I remember Alex and I actually, I guess you would call it, we quit the band, I guess, there, albeit this was literally probably lasted like a week or two, maybe not even that. But we were fed up with everything. I don't know. Like I said, I don't even know what at this point. I was just, probably stupid stuff that you got over obviously quick, but we ended up renting another room in the same facility that we were practicing in. And I moved my drum set out of the Cannibal Corpse room and moved it into this other room. And Alex brought his bass stuff, and it was basically me and Alex. And the other guys were, in the other room. Like I said, this lasted maybe all of a couple of weeks at most. But Alex had the beginnings of Hammer Smashed Face. And I'll never forget, because that's what we worked on, him and I. When he said, I got these riffs, and it was the whole beginning of the song, dun, 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 that whole thing right there. And I put that beat to at the beginning, and we put the blast in there. And, we had the beginnings of this song, which I don't know how special we thought it was at the time, other than, we were into it. It sounded great to us, man. It's an awesome song. We're really digging it. We're loving the beginnings of it. And then soon after that, like, we made up. The band's, back together, all thing. I said no one probably even knew this much, or even in the scene in Buffalo and our friends. So the song continued then. But I remember us telling those guys, okay, I guess it would have been Jack and Barnes and Russe still in the band, that we got this cool beginnings of a song here, and they were all down with it. We played them the riffs and played them the beginning, and they were like, oh, this is killer, and then we finished the song. So I primarily believe it's mostly Alex's song. I'm not sure who have had much, if Jack was involved in the writing. At that point, it was such a collaborative effort that we were all involved. But that was I'll never forget that. That it happened to be with Hammer Smash Face. And I believe that was the first song that we wrote for Tomb of the Mutilated as well. I'm almost positive. So then we just kept on rolling. We write Hammer, and then we, write the rest of the album and go to record it. So yeah, it's a fun little tale, to look back on. To go, wow, how that came about. That was pretty cool.
It's always interesting how anger, stress, difficult times make really great music. So clearly you guys were pissed off and wrote a very pissed off song, and it's become legendary now. I imagine Barnes wrote the lyrics, right?
Yeah, at that point.
Did he come up with the title of the song as well?
I'm almost positive that was all Barnes with the title, and of course he wrote all the lyrics because he was writing them all for, wrote them all for Butcher to Birth, wrote them all for Tomb of the Mutilated. So I'm pretty sure, I'm almost 100% positive that Barnes came up with the title of the song as well.
That's what I figured.
Yeah.
Scott Burns is the legendary producer and produced, so many great death metal projects and all of your early releases. What was he like to work with in the studio?
Oh, he was amazing. He was the sixth member of the band. I mean, at that point, obviously, we've done 2 albums with him, before we went in to do Tomb of the Mutilated. And, he was our friend. He was obviously our producer, and he was wanting us to do the best we can, be the best band we can. And it was great working with him. I mean, such a great guy. It was awesome. I reconnected with him recently within the last few months since he wrote that book and all. And it was great to see him and great to reminisce about the old times. And he was such a great guy, really a great producer. I mean, legend. Yeah, it was awesome working with Scott.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to reach out to get him on the show for this particular song, but I'm going to do at least two more Cannibal songs, so I want to get him on because we talk about the production. We did it with the great Jay Ruston today, which was fun to talk to him about it too. So this song has become legendary for a variety of reasons. Clearly, where most people probably heard the song that weren't already big death metal fans is, of course, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective with Jim Carrey, who wanted you guys in the movie. And I remember talking to, I can't remember if it was you or Alex, might even been Barnes. I can't remember. Probably all three of you at some point. But you guys said, hey, we've been offered to do this movie. What do you think? And I'm like, Jim Carrey, he was just on that In Living Color. I knew him and I knew the show. And I was like, whatever. And they sent me the script. And I read the script and it was horrible. Like, horrible. And so I remember talking to you guys, it's like, because at that point, underground death metal band, you're doing really well in the underground world, it's rising, and it's a bit of a risk because if the movie's not good or it's too commercial, it's too corny, does that ruin your credibility? But you guys decided to do it. What made you decide to go ahead and do that?
Yeah, I mean, I just think it was such a crazy opportunity, right? So off the wall that we weren't expecting anything like that. And I remember when we got the call to, whomever called us I guess it was you guys probably to see if we wanted to do this, or we got the offer to do that. So at first it definitely was like, wow, that's crazy. In a slapstick comedy, when we found out it's Jim Carrey, we of course all loved Jim Carrey at that point. We did love the show in Living Color. I remember watching it all the time. I think we just mulled it over, and as long as we weren't depicted as in a comedic sense, I guess, we felt like, well, why not? It's just something different, something fun. I think with being all young and just gung ho, and I think we just went for it, and we were hoping for the best. Obviously, it all worked out, and here we are talking about a legendary classic movie that right, that so many people got into Cannibal Corpse and death metal because of that.
It's interesting because I remember talking to the producer and the director about it, and they were somewhat reassuring that Jim loves the band. He doesn't want to make fun of them. He wants to have them in, and he just thought it'd be fun to have a death metal thing, which was again just kind of adds to the insanity of the movie. But the quick story about the movie. So there's a screening in LA, in Hollywood. Both the producer and the director invited me to the screening. I'm like, okay. I mean, I got to go, right? Our band's in it, but I'm really nervous because the script was awful, like really not good. So I go to the screening. I'm sitting between the director and the producer. I'm thinking to myself before the starts, like, what do I do? What do I say afterwards if this thing is just awful? It turns out it was incredible. And Jim Carrey basically ad-libbed probably 90% of that movie. The script was just kind of a guideline, but I asked him afterwards, I don't remember any of that stuff being in the script. So, we threw out the script and just let Jim go. But yeah, it turned out to be obviously a great decision for you guys. And like you said, so many people discovered this song, and so many people just discovered death metal at all from this thing. And it's played constantly all the time. And Jim's in it. The best version of it though is the DVD cut where he's on stage and all that like long cut of it.
Yeah, that network version. I know. I mean, when we went and saw the movie initially, because we obviously filmed all this stuff, when we saw it, we were so thrilled the movie was good. And here we are on the big screen. And then I remember watching it going, oh man, what happened to the one scene where Jim jumps on stage? And there was like another scene. There was a couple scenes that didn't make it. And then a year later, when it ended up being on like TBS or whatever it was, and there it was like, oh my gosh, at least it's seen the light of day. And because exactly those scenes are the best ones. I'm surprised they actually took those out and didn't have it in the theatric version, but I'm glad they still were able to see the light of day.
Well, that was back in the day when movies had to be short. So I think the movie had to be, I can't remember what the screen time was when it first came out, probably 90 minutes and not more than that. So at least when they did the DVD version of it, or VHS or whatever it was that first came out, that's when they had the long version of it. And I'm happy that that's the one that all the TV stations started to play too, because you never know how that goes. So, did you start playing the song live before the movie came out? I can't remember.
I would imagine. I don't think we would have played it. I don't remember. It's hard to remember. If we played anything, we didn't play a lot. Maybe at that point before it was released. Maybe before Butchered, maybe we would have done something like that. I don't know, but I can't remember that fully. But I would almost think we would have waited until Tune was out before we actually played that song live.
Yeah. And do you remember like the early audience reactions for the song?
It was a great reaction. I mean, it was definitely a great reaction. I think we've always, of course, had a positive reaction with that song. I think back then we might have opened the set with, of course, which is kind of crazy to think now that obviously we always closed the set with Hammer. But to open the set because it was your new song, it's your first song on the record, we tend to do that a lot. I recall overall it was a positive vibe on that, and the fans really dug it.
The whole record, I thought, when it came out, I love the first couple records, obviously, but this one was a step up. I felt like, you guys really were coming together as a band, as musicians, and just musically, lyrically, the whole thing was kind of on another level. That's when I first started thinking, like, oh, these guys really have something going on here. Like, this is like a real band that's going to be big, I think.
Oh, well, good to hear, man. I think, yeah, we felt the same way. We just felt like we were slowly moving up that ladder, especially in our musicianship and our songwriting. I mean, crazy to think we were such a new band. I mean, right out of the gate, when we recorded Eating Back to Life, we weren't even together, what, a year maybe at that point, so we were kind of growing as a band as we went. It wasn't like we were sitting in the wings waiting to get signed or, oh, we got all this material and we're honed in on our style and all that. We were growing musically as the band was growing in age, basically. So I think we were right. We were coming into our own more or less, especially with Tomb of the Mutilated. And, arguably, I think that's our most ferocious record. I mean, I really listened to that, and I listened to my drumming in particular, and I'm like, man, I was going crazy back then. That young guy, adrenaline, and but been playing for a few more years, honing the skills, I guess, a little more so. But yeah, what a ferocious record overall. Yeah, and Hammer, what can we say, right?
What does it feel like? Because that song's been covered quite a lot, actually, as I've gone through it. What does it feel? How does it feel like to hear other bands like cover your songs now, especially that one?
Yeah, I think it's awesome. I mean, it's huge flattery, of course, big, wow, people, if they're going to cover our songs, I think it's amazing, right? It's great to know that we're influential to so many musicians and bands out there. It's an incredible feeling. And I remember, just the song itself, I remember playing it in Chile, in Santiago a couple of times. And it was I think there's footage on YouTube where it's the biggest pits of all time. And then the humming along with the riffs. I mean, that seems like that's one of those songs, or if not the only song that they do that for us on pretty much all of South America. So you're going, wow, man, if they're going to hum the riffs and be louder than the band when they're doing that, it's pretty amazing. It's pretty cool feeling.
Yeah, and so people that might not be that familiar with death metal, a lot of older metal fans, the one thing that they can't get around their heads is the vocal style. Can you explain like how that vocal style came to be and why you guys decided to go in that direction vocally?
Yeah, I mean, when you listen to the early, listen to our demo tape, of course, if anyone, I guess you can hear it. Anybody can now. It's all over YouTube and all that. But, we had more of a thrash style. Chris was singing more in like a melee from Creator, kind of mixed with Blaine from The Accused. I guess that's what we always kind of described it as. And that was the sign of the times where we were just still growing as teenagers, and we're kind of helped forming a new genre, I guess, here, because we're products of thrash metal. So our vocal heroes were the same bands I mentioned earlier, like Tom Araya and, Don Doty and, and all the thrash guys. I mean, then it's starting to come into play where we're forming, where you got, Jeff Becerra from Possessed that's starting to growl a little more. And then, of course, once Death came out and you got Scream Bloody Gore and you got Chuck singing the way he sang, that was such a big deal in the death metal community or the heavy music community, and that kind of really changed the game. So we were just growing with that scene, and yeah, it was crazy to think that Barnes sang on the demo only like 7-8 months earlier, and we went to that death metal style of vocal, So I think that was just it was part of the music. It was what we were feeling. We were feeling that, that push, that we were so influential by thrash metal. And I think Eaten Back to Life in the early Cannibal has that element musically. We sound more of like a really, really heavy thrash band, but with the death metal style vocals. So I think it was just kind of like a natural way to go in our eyes, and whatever Barnes wanted to do. I think at that point we were just, there was no rules. It was just whatever we felt what anyone wanted to do in the band with their own individual self was good. But right, we were really loving Death, and then I remember Altars of Madness came out, Morbid Angel, and we're hearing those, the music and vocals, and it just became, well, this is where it's going, and this is where we want to take it as well.
Yeah, somebody explained it to me one time that I thought made a lot of sense, that as the music was getting heavier and heavier, you couldn't really go anywhere with the vocals. They're just heavy metal vocals or heavy metal vocals. And, there really isn't a way to make them heavier. And then, so this style came into play, and that clearly made the music, and then the vocals became much, much heavier. And that was just in striving to be as heavy as possible, just like, Metallica and Slayer were trying to be, faster and heavier than the bands previous to them. You guys were doing the same thing in your genre as well.
Yeah, totally. Same thing. The vocal thing wasn't there early on with bands like Metallica and Slayer. The music, of course, was there in that intensity. But yeah, for some reason, the vocals just didn't get to that point yet. It obviously took a few years, for that to transition to that way. We were looking at being as extreme as possible at that point, Yeah, going from a thrashy band to, listen to Butchered at Birth and listen to the Tomb of the Mutilated, it is a big difference, all within like a year or two, basically, of what we're doing here. But we just wanted to be as extreme and as evil and dark as possible, and the vocals just fit that kind of style of music we were doing, because listen to Tomb of the Mutilated. Then there's another thing to talk about with Hammer in particular. I mean, it's not like there's any chorus or anything. I mean, nowadays we have choruses and we have a lot of rhythmic changes and all this kind of thing. Tomb, it's not like a vocal driven song. Basically, it's all music, and the vocals are on top of it, and they're done well. But they're like, you can't understand obviously a word what's happening. I don't think on any of the songs on Tomb of the Mutilated. I mean, that's our most extreme album, with the vocals just being like so guttural and just so over the top that but that's what we wanted to do, I guess, at that point. So it's great that a song like Hammer can be that popular, and it's really just almost, do I look at it on music alone? You got the vocals in there, but it's not like, it's not a catchy phrase or something that's happening like a song like Stripped, Raped, and Strangled or something like that.
Yeah, I find it's interesting, listening to stuff all these years later, right? It still sounds fresh. Like whenever you guys play it live, there's a real energy with not only you guys on stage, but the fans as well. And, it's a younger fan base now as well, which is really cool. And it's still, when I listen to it, it's like, it doesn't feel old, or like, listening to something that's like super old. It seems like, this song could have been written and recorded 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I think that's what makes classics, I guess, and then I think of the songs that, right, we all like, or you like, or I like, and I'm always going to bring up, and I'm sure this song is probably, hopefully, going to be in your top 100, Angel of Death by Slayer. How is that song ever going to be old? I mean, the whole album, really, it's just, it sounds like it could have been recorded yesterday. I mean, the music is always so fresh and just so, powerful, that it's just never going to be old. And, and we're fortunate to be, have a song like Hammer, I guess. And, I think we got maybe a few others, but Hammer is just one of those songs.
When you're in recording this, you're obviously very young. Could you have envisioned ever that 30 some odd years later, you'd still be out there touring and creating really good music, and we'd be talking about this song?
Not at all. I think we were day to day, day by day, song by song, tour by tour kind of a thing, because it's crazy to think when you're a new band. Of course, you want to be around as long as possible, but there was no precedent at this point. I mean, it's funny to think of, like, when we started out, and that was 88, 89, you think of the bands that are our heroes, who were only around for a couple of years at this point. Even the iconic bands like Iron Maiden, You know, I mean, they're only around what, what first album came out in 80. So it's not like they've been around for 50 years at this point. So you're going, how long do bands last? Even the Rolling Stones or what have you, they weren't around that long technically in the scheme of things, I guess. So you just didn't know how long can bands last? How long can rock bands? How long can heavy metal bands last? Who knows, I always remember thinking, I'll settle down at some point when I'm older, 40 years old, have a family. And who's playing metal at 40 years old? We don't know anybody, nobody's doing that. That's crazy talk, right? So yeah, no, we never thought any of that. I mean, and it's just amazing to still be going at this point and to be relevant and, have a fan base that we do and just, keep churning it out. I mean, it is amazing. And then a song like Hammer Smash Face, right? It's my favorite song that we've ever written too. And it's just for the same reasons like the fans would like it. I mean, it's a great song. It's a fun song. It's fun to play, it's fun to hear, I love, of course, the reaction that the fans are giving us back. I mean, so how does that not pump you up as a musician to go, this is, wow, what a great feeling that, that we're moving people this much, with a song like this. So it's a great feeling, and man, it's great feeling to still be, like I said, be around 36 years or whatever it is at this point. It's pretty remarkable.
It's amazing career and an amazing song. And I can't thank you enough for doing this today. I really appreciate having you on.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I appreciate it, man. Thank you for having me.
And there you have it. Big thanks to Paul Mazurkiewicz from Cannibal Corpse for coming on. Our friend Jay Ruston talking about the production on this great song. And of course, Mr. Martin Popoff. Big thanks to Lizzie Borden for our theme song. And of course, huge thanks to Christian Blatt, the producer of the show and also the creator of the show. So until next time, we'll see you.
100